I'll try and keep it very brief. I was just reflecting coming into this session and just thinking to myself, like, how grateful I am for opportunities like this. This is my first time moderating a panel. I've never done this before. And I'm just grateful to this program for creating those spaces where we are allowed to grow and develop as leaders. I don't take it for granted because I've been part of other leadership programs where you're more or less like a silent attendee. You know, you can get away, especially when you're a bit of an introvert like I am, you can get away with kind of taking a back seat, allowing your imposter syndrome to, you know, take over, and you're not really pushed to step outside of your comfort zone. So I was just thinking about that, and I was also thinking about that in the context of human capital investment, right? Because it's all about us as individuals being resources and the environments that allow us to really pull the very best out of us so that we can impact our communities or the environments we find ourselves in. So I encourage you all individually as we're going through this discussion to just reflect on that, reflect on yourself as a resource, right, for development. To the extent that you participate in this thing we call a society, and what has helped you, or what have you observed that's been useful to you in pulling out your best potential, and where do you also feel like more could be done for that to happen, because that's essentially what our discussion will center around. So having said that, I would like to invite our in-person panelists to join me on the stage. I believe we also have one panelist who's joining virtually, so I'll just ask them to join. And I'll be asking them to give us an introduction for themselves, to introduce who they are, and tell us a bit more about what they do and what makes them interesting as individuals. So panelists, please join me. Yeah. I was told. So I think Naïssa, you feel free to join. Naïssa will. This is Naïssa Umutoni Karekezi. She'll speak more about who she is and what she does. I've interacted with her during our graduation this weekend, and she's just an amazing person. We're also roomies, so we've developed a bond on that basis. I'm also going to invite Andrew. Andrew? Yes. Andrew is a media and publicity supervisor with CNOOC, Uganda, and a Huduma fellow with the class of 2024. Thank you for joining us, Andrew. And finally, I'm going to invite Michael. You around? This is Michael Niyitegeka. He is the executive director of Refactory, and CDL Africa country manager for Uganda. And joining us virtually is Catherinerose Barretto. She's the co-founder of Binary Labs and a member of the board of directors for this lovely, amazing institute we call Leo Africa. So with that said, I'm going to give each of the panelists maybe just 2 or 3 minutes to talk about who they are, what they do, and maybe an interesting fact about you. So we'll start with, we can start with you, Naïssa. Take it away.
Good afternoon. I hope you're well. Muraho. My name is Naïssa Umutoni Karekezi. I'm from Kigali, Rwanda. I'm a business development supervisor at the African Management Institute. We enable African businesses to thrive through entrepreneurship programs and workplace learning. I'm a YELP fellow, class of 2024, and very honored to be here and have this discussion with you. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Michael Niyitegeka. I have been part of this journey. I remember the first meeting with Awel in Kololo when I'm not a fellow, I am a supporter, but I lead the team at Refactory, and Refactory is a software academy that primarily focuses on getting people to work. Previously, I used to work in Makerere. I taught in Makerere for 12 years until 2013, and I've spent the last 11 years trying to build Refactory.
I believe it's afternoon, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrew Mbigiti. My latest it is not a qualification, but my latest introduction is I'm a Huduma fellow. As of yesterday, I'm a Huduma fellow. I'm in communications and publicity right now, working with CNOOC Uganda Limited. But my training is in petroleum engineering. I think the environmental activists against me. But yeah, that is more or less about me. Thank you.
And Catherinerose, I hope you can hear me. Please confirm.
Yes, I can. Thank you, Priscilla.
Thank you for joining us. Maybe you could also just give us a quick introduction about who you are and what you do.
Sure. So my name is Catherinerose Barretto. I'm dialing in from Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. I work at the intersection of human capital development, inclusion, and innovation. And I'm the co-founder of a tech engineering venture based out of Tanzania, but we work across the region. And our focus is to retool and upskill tech engineers. And I'm also extremely humbled and thankful to be on the board of the Leo Africa Institute. Do you also want the interesting fact, Priscilla?
Yes, that would be nice.
So,
thank you.
As our previous speakers were talking about how we find the capacity within ourselves to support others to grow. An interesting fact about me is I'm currently learning how to crochet. Something I used to consider only for older people, you know, like my grandmother, my mom, my older aunts. But I'm finding that the repetitive nature of crocheting is really helping me to bring my attention to the present moment. You know, it's focused around movement, around the rhythm of your breathing. And interestingly, it's giving me an opportunity to be creative. And I don't often get that in my day-to-day job, that this opportunity to be creative and also to feel a sense of achievement. So it's interesting that I'm learning to like crocheting, and I never thought I would, you know, take up something that I felt was for people that were much older than me.
Thank you for sharing that, Catherinerose. So my first question actually goes to you as someone who's very active in the human capital space. I'm curious to know, and just also to lay the groundwork for all of us here, how would you define human capital? And why do you think it's essential for economic development in emerging markets?
Thank you, Priscilla. So before I get started, I'd just like to recap a few things I heard this morning. The World Bank's Human Capital Index shows us that a child born on our continent today will only be 40% as productive as they could with complete education and full health. Our continent has the youngest population in the world, with over 60% of people under the age of 25. This means that there are over 200 million youth on our continent. And our unemployment rate is extremely high, averaging over 20% across the continent. And in some of our countries, it's as high as 70, 80%. We have the highest youth unemployment rate in the world at over 30%. And if you break that down further, young women face even higher unemployment rates than young men. By 2030, our continent is expected to make up 42% of the world's youth and account for 75% of those under the age of 35. And this keeps me up at night. So when we talk about human capital, what we're really talking about is the most powerful force for transformation, the knowledge, the skills, and the capabilities that make people productive. And essentially, we're talking about people. We're putting people at the center. So human capital development for me refers to the processes of enhancing or optimizing skills, your knowledge, your abilities, and the experiences of individuals within your workforce. I like to think of it as an invisible infrastructure that powers economies. We build it through education, by strengthening healthcare, and refining this through experience. So unlike machines that depreciate over time, I really do believe that human capital grows stronger with use. Just as muscles grow with exercise, our capacity to create value compounds over time. It's the only investment that walks home every evening and returns each morning with even more potential. And in today's economy, I really do think that the self-enforcing style of growth makes human capital our most precious resource. So when I think about those statistics that I just shared and the ones in the morning, I really think we need to flip the script. What some people see as a challenge, I see as our superpower. And that our youth are not just a demographic, but imagine 200 million minds, 200 resources that are bursting with creativity, hungry for opportunity, and really armed with tools for the digital age. And for me, this is not a crisis. It really is a revolution waiting to happen. And so going into your second question, when I think about, so what does this mean for us? And why is it important? And I think it goes back to this intensely massive untapped potential. And if we invest, and this idea of why we're investing in human capital, and then it's not just about our continent, right? It's about global prosperity. So if I think about kind of where we need to be investing and opportunities, because I'm always thinking about where the opportunities. If everyone is saying we are the continent with the world's youngest population, but the lowest skills, all right? 60% of Africans are under 25, and 85% of our children on our continent cannot read even a simple text by the age of 10. If we could transform this youth bulge into skilled talent, that's $500 billion to annual GDP growth across our continent. The innovation gap is costing us trillions. We produce only 2% of global research output, and only 17% of the world population is what we have, but we only produce 2% of global research output. If we could, and this is where the work that Michael does is so important, if we could boost STEM education, we could generate $1.5 trillion in new business value by 2030. That's around the corner for us. We talk about the job skills mismatch, and 80% of African workers are in vulnerable employment. But if we could figure out how to rapidly upskill and look at productivity gains, and I'm talking about using technology, using innovative pedagogy, we could grow 200 million 30 jobs by 2030. And then when we think about rounding out what human capital means, it's not just about the skill, but it's about this health environment we have and how healthy is our human capital. Our continent only has 3% of the world's health workers, but we have 24% of global disease burden. So if we could figure out by 2030 again, which is really around the corner when you think about it, how can we train 6 million more health professionals? We could save 3.1 million lives annually. So these are the things that really make me think about kind of where's the gap and where's the opportunity. And I like to think of it as opportunity. So if we're going to have the world's largest workforce by 2030, larger than India or even China, where do we need to invest? We need to invest in people today if we really want to make sure this demographic dividends pays off for us first, and then of course for the rest of the world. Thank you.
Thank you. With our very young population, and the I guess the bridging that we have to do. There's clearly a deficit. That 40% marker can be very disheartening, for someone who hears that. And I think a lot of us here also have to have in mind that we are very privileged, honestly, to have had maybe the training or the education that we have. And that kind of just leads me into my next question, which I'll address to you, Michael. You are very, very active in this space. So I was just wondering, how can education systems, in your opinion, be adapted to foster creativity and innovation to meet the evolving needs of our global economy? Of course, in this context, we're talking about building skills for the future. So how can that actually be achieved?
Yeah, so thank you very much. So first of all, the reality is that the skills for the future are happening now. Because sometimes when we talk about AI, we talk about blockchain, talk about all these technologies and the things that we need to be working with, it feels like, and especially in this part of the continent, it feels like they are 10 years away, but they're actually here. So we are late to the game. The other revelation that I got while I was working at Makerere was that we spend quite a substantial amount of time talking. I worked in Makerere for 12 years. By the time I left Makerere, 11 years ago, I think the last 4 years or so we were talking about, because it had become real, that we were training people in the IT faculty and they were not finding work. And so the conversation then was, how do we get people to work? So this year I was invited by the National Council of Higher Education to talk to some of the university leaders about how do we get people to work. And I said, look, 11 years ago, I was part of you guys and we were talking. We are still talking. And I guess for me, it was that point where I said, look, this is not for me. I need to jump ship. Because the one thing that hit me was that, and majority of my colleagues I was working with in the IT faculty, we were doing well, if I could put it that way. We were advancing, we were doing, you have masters, you go for a PhD, publishing, getting promoted. It hit me that for us to train for the industry, you need to be in the industry. So it's no longer just an academic qualification accumulation. You need to understand that trade. I remember one time I proposed that all the lecturers need to go for industrial training. And I was almost crucified because the question was, who's going to supervise me? I'm like, yeah, the student you taught who is now a manager, who has the skill, can supervise you because they understand the trade. And so the one thing that needs to happen, it has to be radical. We can't run away from it. It has to be radical. And radical in a sense that, and it's already happening elsewhere. I was reading a statistic that for the first time, the last 10 years have seen a significant decline in university enrollment in the US and Europe, and more people are opting for micro-credentials as opposed to degree programs. For the first time. What does that tell? Because the industry doesn't really care what you have now. The industry is looking for, do you have that trade? And they're investing in it. And they're saying, if you can show me you have it, I'll hire you. I will pay you. What are the universities in Europe doing, for example? Some universities have realigned the education system, and they are now allowing what they call credit transfer. So if you have a micro-credential certification, they are saying, you bring it, we'll look at what content you've covered, and then you can complete your qualification. That means that we need to be agile. It is not possible in our environment where a review of curricula can only happen after 5 years. if you look at the education, I mean, if you go to the National Council of Higher Education, if they approve a new program, you can only submit it for a review and reapproval after a window of 5 years. And the argument is that you need to run a cycle, which is 3 years, people graduate, complete, and then assess that cycle for you to know if this curricula requires to be changed. Now, in the IT space, 5 years is a lifetime. To be honest, 5 years is a lifetime. I remember writing a curricula to National, and it was sent to the regulator for review. And they were proposing, they returned the curricula with a requirement to include a certain course. But the technology they were asking us to use, industry had stopped using it 7 years ago. So what am I trying to say in this whole rambling that I have? Is that at leadership level, we must be open to new models. We must be open. Number two, we must stop talking and do something. I've been doing something at Refactory for 5 years, and I can tell you, I've trained close to 700 young people, and I have placed close to 90% in work. So there is something that is working. Now, the question is, in the mainstream education, nobody's going to look at me and accept what I am doing. Because I was asked by one of the people in the education, are you regulated? I said, you can't regulate what you don't understand. What I'm doing can't fit in any current accreditation framework within government, within the Ministry of Education. It can't, so I can't award a certificate. I can award a certificate of attendance because it's a certificate anyway, it's a certificate. But I tell the students that my only accreditation body is the employer. The day they stop hiring our students is the day I have no work. So if I can place you into work, you have been accredited. That's my trade. The second thing that needs to happen is that we need to be very intentional and create an incentive for industry to be part of this game. In Europe, in the US, they have created positions of what they call professors of practice. So you're not a professor by publication, you're a professor because you have the practice, you know that trade. And that's how innovation happens. The unfortunate bit here is the assumption that innovation happens in vacuum. No, innovation happens out of practice. So we need to create openings for industry to infuse in our education system. The third is that it is important, and I hope I'm not taken out of context. It is important that those that are in positions of authority to create space for the guys who think radical. I couldn't stay in the mainstream university because for me I was bored. And every time I got bored, I tried to do something. I see my brother there at the back, Kwame. I kept on trying to bring industry, but then I realized I was bringing industry into a space that is quite rigid. And I said, I can't stay here. I will run. Mad? So I chose to go and change myself. And I'm happy. And Priscilla, one of the things I would say is that one thing I've come to learn is that the only way you prove that you're changing is if you're doing something. And I tell people that even if I'm able to find one person into work, get one person into work, I'll sleep comfortably.
Thank you. Naïssa, I'm coming to you, and I know there's a lot that Michael has shared that you can relate to, that you have thoughts about, right? So I had created a separate question for you, but I actually just want you to express your thoughts on what he's shared, supplement, and just, yeah, give us your thoughts.
Thank you very much, and it's really hard to speak after Michael with all the experience, but one thing I really took note of is a lot of talking without practical ways of actually helping young people put the learning into tangible, results. And yeah, that's really something that, our education system has to look into and actually give experiential learning to students, because at the end of the day, you want to get employed, so you have to prove that you're capable of doing the job. And the only way to do it is not by, writing notes and having all these theories, but it's actually, doing and learning, because you will fail at first, but with time you will get better at what you do. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. There's a thought I just had, which I'm going to throw back to Michael, because I think it's important to address. I'm sorry, and I am coming to you, Andrew, don't worry. But I'm just curious to understand, why do you think that resistance exists? And I think it's particularly found in our African context for some reason. I think we're generally kind of a bit more conservative in nature and resistant to change, but I just wanted to also get your thoughts on why you think there is such resistance and how it maybe could be addressed.
Truth is that it's the fear of the unknown in many cases. It's the fear of the unknown that if you're introducing new technology or if you're introducing new thoughts, where does this leave me? And if that leaves me in a state of diminished power, then I'll probably, so if I'm a professor and you're saying that the stuff I am teaching is not going to be relevant, I'm going to fight hard to ensure that it remains relevant. That's number one.
Take it personally.
Yeah, take it personally. And I've seen it happen in many places where I was doing an assignment and what I was supporting a government agency, and I was saying, for you to move to this position, you need to have these competences. And somebody shot from the back and said, so what about me, who has a name? And I'm like, dude, it's not about you now. It's about the entity. It's about the organization. And so the first thing we need to really is to have the humility to step out of our spaces. That's number one. I have no qualification in IT. Never studied IT, but I've been in the IT space for the last 20 years. People ask me, how do you run a software academy when you have no qualification? Again, that's a misnomer of education, where you think you must qualify in it for you to practice. And the first thing I did at Refactory was that we don't require you to have any qualification in IT to join our programs. And everybody said, so how will you? I'm like, yeah, it's a trade. The way you go to learn carpentry, software engineering is a vocation. The second thing I tried to do, again, it's about resistance. Because at one time I asked my dean, must I set an exam to prove that somebody has learned? They said, yes, because that's the regulation. I said, yeah, but this regulation is written by a human being. Can we challenge it? They said, you can't. So I said, okay, if I ever get an opportunity, I'll do something. We don't have exams at Refactory. And so how will you prove? I'm like, when you know, you know.
Either you know it or you don't.
Yeah, so if you know you have the competence, and I have people here that have gone through Refactory. The industry asks me, Michael, give me 5 people, give me 10 people. And I'll give you the 10 people because I have seen them do that trade. The other challenge we have around resistance to change is that, and that's one fear that I think generally in Africa, I don't know if it's Africa, but yes, generally, is that there's this whole territory mentality. When I was in my career, I attempted to supervise a student from the IT faculty who wanted to do a project with a student in engineering. And for me, that was super brilliant. I was super excited because I had been an advocate at the university that we need to break these silos, we need to break barriers. You find a student who has done a course in engineering who has no clue what happens in IT.